Y'all hear me? Yes. Okay, everybody, hi, and welcome to Cocktails and Conservation. My name is Dave DiBenedetto. I'm the editor-in-chief of Garden & Gun magazine, and I'm also a unabashed conservationist and outdoorsman, but we're going to get into more on that later. I want to say first, thank you to Hickory Nut Gap Farms. I don't think there could be a more beautiful place to have this event, especially the floral, all of those floral, everything is native. And if I'm correct here, I think it's all going to be replanted after it comes off the wall. So anyway, Hickory Nut Gap Farm, 5th generation farm. You folks probably know this, but they're all about the connection between human and the animal, which is terrific. And they've also proven that you can be successful while successfully caring for the land, which really means everything to us, and I think if you asked anyone up here, they would agree. Also, Asheville. There's no better community than Asheville when you want to talk about folks who have a connection to the land, a sense of place, who care about sustainability, and who understand what conservation means and does for their world. That's just one reason why we're delighted that we partnered with Explore Asheville, not only because we get out of, us flatlanders, get out of the humidity for a night. It makes perfect sense. And the brains behind all of that are my good friend, Vic Isley from Explore Asheville. Please come up.
I grew up on the farm, so I know how to mount a cinder block. Good evening, everyone. Man, this is such a special place, and we are so fortunate to have good partners in our friends at Garden & Gun. They know the South, and Asheville is the dynamic South. I was fortunate enough to grow up in North Carolina, in Rockingham County, and I've been here in Asheville for the last 3 years. And I've been telling places stories for almost 30 years. Yes, I started when I was 5. And Marla and I met when we were 5. And in this special place and fortune that we have of telling places stories and being here in Asheville, in all of my listening sessions, I've never heard so many people use the phrase that they've been drawn to a place as here. And that is when you know you have magic. And so these kinds of meaningful partnerships where we can have what I call the three-legged stool, which is Asheville and shining a spotlight on this amazing place and its people, Garden & Gun with their readership, and the folks at the Good Road with their viewership. And I am the person in between you and the meaningful conversations that are going to happen on this stage. But thank you to Dave, to Christian at Garden & Gun. I want to recognize Marla Tambellini, our Senior Vice President of Marketing, and Dodie Stevens, soon to be our VP of Marketing, coming back to Explore Asheville. We're so happy. And Jamie, where's the flat bill? Jamie Ager, where are you? Thank you. Jamie, thank you to you and your family for being believers and supporters and for conserving a place like this and also exporting the amazing flavors of this place and your stewardship of it. So thank you all for being here with us. I can't wait to hear this amazing conversation. Thank you to each of you for what you do every day, and particularly for the Utopian Seed Project right here at home. Dave, take it away.
So my job allows me to attend a lot of great, fun events. But as I mentioned earlier, none of them align more directly with my passions than this one. We created, at Garden and Gun, we created the Champions of Conservation 2 years ago to put a spotlight on folks who are doing incredible work to save the southern landscape. I mean, these aren't folks who are out there for fame and fortune. They're out there to make a difference. And these aren't folks who are out there for magazine coverage, for that matter. They were selected from at least 100 other possible candidates. We met early. We probably met 8 months ago as an editorial team. We had our list. Everybody had their thoughts, their ideas. We start to whittle down those ideas or those folks who might be good. Then we bring in an advisory panel. This year, that panel included Mamie Parker from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, Simon Perkins, the CEO of Orvis, Sally Bethea, who was one of the first river keepers in the South, on and on. And we got together, and then we whittled this list down. I mean, to get to 10 is really tough. And what we kept coming back to was who's making a difference, who has passion, who could use it, who could also use maybe a spotlight on what they're doing. And I couldn't be excited more for you guys to hear what they all have to say tonight. Quickly, before we get into questions, I need to shout out Amanda Heckert, executive editor. Raise your hand. Yes. Lindsay Lyles, assistant editor. Yes. As everyone up here knows, those two are really the brains, the brawn, and everything else behind this whole franchise. So thank you guys. It's incredible to be able to work with you. All right. I'm going to do a quick introduction of everybody. I might stand up. And then we're going to do questions. Raise your hand. Mike Chamberlain. There he is. Mike Chamberlain, a.k.a. the Turkey Doc, is a professor of wildlife ecology and management at the University of Georgia. It's safe to say Mike knows more about wild turkeys than anyone else in the world, except maybe a turkey. A lifelong hunter and a wildlife ecologist, he brings decades of experience to the study of the recent decline in the wild turkey population and works with private landowners to bring them back. Dr. Jenny Stevens. Dr. Jenny Stevens is the Chief Executive Officer for the Center for Heirs Property Preservation. For almost 20 years, she has headed the Center for Heirs Property Preservation, a North Charleston, South Carolina nonprofit that offers educational seminars and legal services to help owners of family land that pass down generationally without a clear title. She also, in her piece, talks about wearing a super shero cape every day. And it may be one of my favorite lines that we've run. More on that later. Dr. Jacqueline Eccles. There we go. President of the South River Watershed Alliance. Most people are aware of Atlanta's Chattahoochee River, even Alan Jackson, unfortunately. Just kidding, I like that song too. But Eccles fights for the preservation of its lesser-known sister, the South River. For 13 years, she has led the South River Watershed Alliance in its efforts to keep the river, which flows through underserved areas of the city, clean and accessible. Mitzi Reed. Mitzi Reed is the invasive species coordinator for the Native American Fish and Wildlife Society. She grew up on the Choctaw Reservation in Philadelphia, Mississippi, and managed its 40,000 acres for over a decade. Now in her new position, she works with tribes all over the country on invasive species management. J.J. Apodaca, the director of Amphibian and Reptile Conservancy. He works with all the slimy, scary stuff. JJ is a geneticist and herpetologist based in Asheville. He combines those two specialties and uses mind-blowing genetic work, my words, mind-blowing, genetic work to conserve some of the South's most unknown reptiles and amphibians, including a staff favorite, the black warrior water dog. Julie Moore. Julie Moore is the founder of the Venus Flytrap Champion Program. She is a plant ecologist who has had a very long and very successful career working for a number of places, including the Tall Timbers Research Station and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. She's worked with rare and endangered plants and animals all over the South. She is rumored to be in retirement, but now, instead, she's saving the Venus flytrap and its habitat. More on that soon. And then finally, Chris Smith, the founder of the Utopian Seed Project. He's the author of the James Beard award-winning book about okra, in which he uses okra slime as a hair product. For a pretty good picture. It stands up a little higher than that in the photo he took. But he's equally passionate about crops, other crops as well. He's the founder of the Utopian Seed Project here in Asheville. He experiments with everything from collards to yard-long beans to a number of things I am afraid to pronounce, and is set up to set us up for a more diverse and sustainable future in farming. That is our panel. All right, Mike, let's start with you. The turkey dock. Everybody out here has seen wild turkeys everywhere, right? Does everybody know that wild turkeys are declining? The population is kind of plummeting? Right. You know, Mike, talk to us about the fact, it's kind of surprising to everybody, right? Like, I remember in the 80s when I first started a turkey hunt, the late 80s, you could slam a car door and a turkey would gobble back at you. You know, obviously since then, more people have taken up the sport. It's gotten a little more competitive, you might say. But turkey populations are declining. What's driving that?
Yeah, I mean, so if you look across the Southeast and parts of the Midwest, I mean, populations have been declining for about the last 20 years, if you look at the data that agencies have collected. But it's been a really slow decline. So if you look from one year to the next, nothing really sticks out. But if you look across, say, a decade or 2 decades, I mean, we're talking 50 to 80% declines in a lot of states. Harvest has declined. Wild turkeys are one of the most popular game species in North America. They're actually the only game species that interest is increasing in hunting them versus other species. So as far as the factors driving the declines, I mean, somebody asked me a little while ago about this, and I've been asked this on podcasts and shows a lot. The analogy is like death by 1,000 cuts. Right. If you look around the Southeast right now and you look at the landscapes that turkeys live in, they're fragmented. We've lost, thousands, hundreds of thousands of acres of habitat. At the same time, we've created habitats that are more conducive to predators that eat turkeys and their eggs than the turkeys themselves, such as bobcats and coyotes and foxes and raccoons and rat snakes and things that use edges that benefit from fragmentation. Turkeys are the only game species only game bird in North America that's hunted while they're breeding. So we actually target males for removal during the spring when they're actively breeding. So you put all of that kind of together in a blender, and none of that's really positive for turkeys. So there's really no one factor driving the declines. I kind of look at it like a football game. Every game, the outcome is dictated by all the positions on the field. Some of the positions are always important. The offensive line's always important. Defensive line's always important. But in any given year or in any given game, one position may influence the outcome. And that's kind of what you see, and it speaks to how complex the issues are across the landscape.
So you mentioned this briefly, but hunting. So you're a hunter. I'm a hunter, right?
Fanatical.
Fanatical, yes. Yeah. What about that dichotomy? You're working to save the bird, right? You're everything you're about. Does hunting help you in that?
It's a paradox for sure, because I'm passionate about conserving an animal that I kill.
Right.
And that may be hard for some people to understand, but it's part of who I am. I was a turkey hunter long before I was a turkey scientist. Right. And hunting is part of who I am, and the consumptive use of the animals that I take is important to me and my family. So yeah, it is a paradox. From the standpoint of understanding the bird, it's absolutely critical in my opinion. Right. I've learned as much about hunting this bird as I ever could learn looking at a computer screen or even spending time in the field with my graduate students. The bird, when you try to kill it, it's going to teach you things you can't learn in a computer screen. And so I feel really blessed that I've been able to study this bird for 30 years, but I've hunted them for 40 years. So I put those two together, and I think it's allowed me to become a much better scientist.
Makes a lot of sense. All right, Jenny. You got the mic. Talk to us. I think it would be great to hear a recent example of the work you're doing and how it's helping folks.
Okay. But let me give you a brief description of what I do first. So we prevent it, fix it, use it in relation to land. Prevent the loss or the growth of heirs' property, fix it in the sense of resolving the title, and use it in the sense of using sustainable forestry as a tool to make the land work for the families rather than the families working for the land. Some of our families are heirs property owners and some are not. They have clear title. So you asked me about a success story, right? When we started with our sustainable forestry program in 2013, there was a young lady. She and her family owned almost 300 acres of land. She was approached by a timber buyer who offered her $45,000 for the timber on all of that acreage. Then probably within 2 weeks, another timber buyer came by and offered her $90,000, right? Doesn't take a rocket scientist, there's a slight difference in those prices. But because she had been attending our workshops, she knew to pause and not sign anything. And then she came back to our forester, who then introduced her to a professional forester, who then came up with the true value of her timber. Does anybody want to guess how much it was? $250,000. Wow. So can you imagine if she took the $45,000, where do you think the other $200,000 went? Right? Okay, so that sounds really good, right? But then when the timber buyer did a title search, guess what he discovered? It was heirs property. And so with heirs property, because you don't have clear title, you should not be cutting your timber. So she literally walked out of the forestry door in our office to our legal door, because we have lawyers and foresters on our team. And long story short, we were able to help her family resolve their title issue so they could cut their timber, but also access USDA programs so that they could replant. So it wasn't just about clear cutting, but it was also making sure that their future generations would benefit from this land.
So tell us about how big your organization is, how it started and how big it is now.
So we started as a project of our local community foundation 2002. And then in 2005, we actually became our own 501c3 organization. And we had a staff of 3 and a budget of about $250,000. Fast forward to now, we have 40 plus people on our team with a budget close to $5 million. Yeah.
Right on. All right, JJ, you got to follow that up. Yes, I'm here for you, buddy. All right, so you use a technique called eDNA in a lot of your work. And the way I've described it to folks is essentially you can figure out what species are in a body of water by sampling the water, not actually seeing the fish or sampling the fish. Is that true? Or if you could do a better job, I'm sure you can tell me what you do.
Yeah, so it's called environmental DNA. It's DNA that we pick up out of the water, and I usually start by telling people it's magic because I've been doing it for over 10 years, and it still seems like science fiction to me. But the idea is that as we all know, we're all sloughing skin cells and hair and DNA all around in our environment all the time. And what we do with environmental DNA is we've been able to go out and harness that idea, and we can filter that DNA through a filter that's fine enough to catch it. And sequencing technology, we all know, it's cheap to get your 23andMe and that sort of thing. And so all of that technology has led us to be able to take that water sample and either detect an endangered species or detect an invasive species, or increasingly we can sequence everything that's in there, and we can tell you the whole community down from the algae to the fish and the turtles.
How about what's the most surprising thing you've found? Or something you were desperately looking for and did find? I mean,
Well, there's a lot of desperately looking for and did find. I mean, that's the power of eDNA is that it allows us to survey and find endangered species on a much wider level than we could before, and that's really where it's at. And I always tell people we can't protect anything if we don't know where it's at, right? And as Mike said, all these things are facing like a million problems, and the biggest problem to be able to fix those for a lot of things, a turkey makes a call, you can see it, people hunt it, it's a lot more obvious where it's at, but a salamander that's this long and spends 11 months plus underground a year is a lot harder to find, or that lives in the stream. So we find rare and endangered stuff all the time with using eDNA, and that's really the power of it. Now, the most exciting or fun thing, I don't know, there's a lot of surprises out there. Here in Western North Carolina, we were doing some sampling years ago. We kept getting 2 old world monkeys, and we couldn't figure it out, and finally we found out that somebody had some pet monkeys and was straight piping into the creek.
All right, that was good. All right, Julie, let's talk about Venus flytraps. I guess what's so amazing to me is, I've known this, and it still blows my mind, that Venus flytraps occupy just a sliver, right? Like 80 miles or so of pineland in the south, and that's it for the entire species.
For the entire world. That's the amazing thing. People found fly traps early on, early settlers in the Carolinas, and sent the information back to England, and people were amazed. And everybody kept thinking we'd find them someplace else, but only within, actually it's 90 miles of Wilmington, North Carolina, barely into the sandhills of North Carolina. If anybody been to Fort Bragg, they might have crawled through 1 or 2 populations. But the population basically has never increased. We still have this incredibly small area where this insectivorous plant exists. And there's nothing else like it in the world. And people know the plant worldwide. That's the amazing thing. You can go to a botanical garden in Kosovo, and there'll be Venus flytraps growing there. People know how to grow them, but what we don't know is how to save them. Horticulturists have been growing flytraps for hundreds and hundreds of years, pretty successfully. Someone asked me this evening, I think you did, about the fact that you see them for sale a lot in big box stores. Those are being propagated by tissue culture, generally in California, in great big greenhouses. And that's the best way to get a fly trap. When it says propagated rather than dug from the wild, because in times past, people really thought the biggest threat was people digging them and selling them. And it was like people in the mountains digging ginseng, that type of local industry. Well, that is a problem, but that's really not the problem. It gets back to the whole business with turkeys. With your amphibians and salamanders, we're just losing habitat. And the closer you live to the coast in North and South Carolina, the greater impact you're having on the habitat for Venus flytraps. It's a complicated situation, and like they both like it wet, then when it dries, there needs to be burning, fire coming through the habitat to keep it open because these plants need sun. So the more people we have in these areas, the less burning we have and the more drainage we have. What I really learned in my life, people need to know what they have before they can appreciate it. Many years ago, I was doing a plant rescue for in eastern North Carolina in a bog that had interesting other insectivorous plants, and the little man who owned the area had filled part of it with sand, and I went into his little store and said, "We're here to dig these plants." And he said, "Lady, if anybody told me they were important, I wouldn't have done it." And that's the whole crux of conservation. People have to understand. They have to put the pieces together. Generally, it's easier to work with biologists. Lately, with fly traps, I work with a lot of nurses who turn out to be wonderful biologists. And we have nurses who are doing relocation efforts. I have another nurse from Duke University who's propagating fly traps for reintroduction. You have to know about the species. Well, people know about fly traps. The point is we need to get ready to really try to save the habitats. And it's not just that little acre they grow on, or 10 acres, or 20. It's what's around those areas. Because as you know, with many of these species, it's the water, it's the fire, everything interacts together to make the habitat suitable. So we have a lot of work ahead of us, and I'm pleased to say we have many cooperators who are interested in fly traps today. Between the nurses, we have all kinds of people. Man called me about his fly traps that he's growing. He's in England and he wants to send them back over here for us to plant in habitats so we won't lose as many. It's just amazing how interested people are. And my little role is to facilitate those interests. And when people can do something, to find a role for them. We had a wonderful plant rescue. We did 2 of them in Boiling Springs community, and we moved 1,100 fly traps. And that's people down on their hands and knees digging them up and replanting them.
So where were you replanting them?
That's really the point. You have to have a safe place to put them so that what will be affected. And the community has a Boiling Spring Lakes, has fly traps in the ditches all over town. It's just amazing. The fly traps were there before the people were. And we moved them to the community center, and we're going to develop an educational site there with signage so people can walk and see, and we'll burn it and they'll understand the management. But that is the hard part, is finding the safe places. That's it. Where are the safe places?
Thank you. That was great. We're going to stay down on the end there. Mitzi. So I hate invasive species as much as I hate single-use plastic water bottles. My wife thought I was crazy because I cut down a tallow tree with the help of a friend in our backyard, because I want my backyard to be, as small as it is, as native as it can possibly be. I'm curious, what's the toughest invasive species that you face?
I think if I were to answer that, I'd probably use my number one go-to, and that's man. Man is the most difficult invasive species out there. Because if you think about it, you know, plants, animals, they're doing what they do. I mean, they're naturally growing. They just happen to come to a place that's perfect for them, and so that their ability to spread, and then man unknowingly or intentionally spreads them, and so they just do what they do and thrive. So trying to control the species itself, especially after they have been established and spreading, and if there's land disturbances nearby and then they find this place and they expand, trying to control that is hard enough without having to control the illegal spread of them. And I've done a lot of feral pig work, And so, and Tennessee, the state of Tennessee is probably one of the biggest examples. As you know, they only had a couple of natural pockets of pigs way back when, and then when they instilled a hunting season, it spread throughout the state. And so, obviously, them pigs didn't get up and fly. So, you know, so yeah, I'd have to say man is our biggest invasive species.
Yeah. How about coyotes? Coyotes get that rap, right? They occasionally snatch a little poodle or something, but how bad are coyotes out there? Not like pigs, not like kudzu.
No, not like them.
Yeah.
They still have their components of being out there and expanding, but in nature you see the natural curves. So you see the roller coaster ride. You know, prey goes up, predators go up. Prey goes down, predators go down. You see that natural roller coaster ride. But when you have invasive species, especially with species that are more tolerant of higher temperatures, you start seeing climate shifts. You start seeing temperature changes in other areas. So you see species expanding. And then our native species are just stuck. You know, they're just like, they're not able to adapt in those situations.
Got it. All right. Dr. Eccles, the South River watershed. Tell us a little bit about why that river is so special to you.
Well, first, it's one of only 2 urban origin rivers in Georgia. Mm-hmm. Most rivers start in the mountains and flow towards the sea. The South River actually starts about a stone's throw from Atlanta's Hartsfield-Jackson Airport, and it flows through predominantly black communities of color neighborhoods, passing through 4 or 5 different counties before it ends up in Jackson Lake. And it actually flows to the Atlantic, entering the ocean just below Savannah.
When did you become enamored with it?
Well, actually back in 1999, when I actually started to work with the individual who started the South River Watershed Alliance. It wasn't me. I just took over the organization in 2011. And, it's a beautiful river. It's pretty obscure. Right. Even folks who live in the neighborhood right around it don't know it's there because it's not named. There aren't any names. So it had a lot of potential. I got involved with it back then. The owner or the person who started it wanted to she was tired and because it's a lot of work, yeah. And asked me if I wanted to take it over in 2011, and I took her up on it. It was on the heels of a federal consent decree that DeKalb County was under, the city of Atlanta, and it's consent decrees, which are just nothing but federal mandates that require you to improve pollution of a water body. It was a one-in-a-lifetime opportunity. So I saw this as the opportunity for the South River, and here I am.
And what are those challenges? That pollution? Is that corporate? Is it just man-made trash when nobody's paying attention to where?
No, it's just sewage.
Sewage. Okay, right.
I guess that's man-made and all of that, corporate. So yeah. But yeah, it's pollution problems are primarily centered around the city of Atlanta and DeKalb County, which are the 2 largest urban areas around the river, and the state regulatory folks to get them to enforce Clean Water Act Clean Water Act requirements. So that's how I got started and figured out very early. In Georgia, you can't, the best way to improve a water body is to recreate on it. As a matter of fact, that's the only way you can improve water quality in
So
Georgia.
you prove that people recreate on
That
it.
you have to show and document the numbers that people are actually recreating on the river. And nobody recreated on the South River with all of its problems,
Right.
Prior to 2011. And I took over the river. I used to go out and sit and look at it. And as I said, being degraded and ignored has its benefits in terms of nature, wildlife, green space, that kind of thing. But the river itself, the water, is what you need to improve to impress Georgia EPD. So I said, okay, how do I do this? And figured out very quickly it was through recreation. No one did any recreation on it, so I put together two programs, both simultaneously in 2011. One was a canoeing and kayaking program, and one was what's called now the South River Water Trail. Both are doing fine. They're really making progress. But the other problem I ran into from the recreational standpoint is that the river flows through predominantly Black, as I mentioned, and marginalized communities. And, it's just a known fact that, most people of color, Black people of color, don't canoe and they don't kayak. Right. So my big issue out of the box was, how do I make this happen, if it will ever happen at all? Right. But I figured I had to give it a shot. So we raised some money, and we bought a bunch of kayaks and canoes, and we did a lot of advertising around the river. And lo and behold, I was just totally floored at the number of folks in the community who came out and recreated on the river then, and now 13 years later, they still do, and they love it.
That's great.
And in that time period, right now, 40 miles of the river are navigable. That is, you can float a canoe and a kayak on them. During the triennial review period, last 3 years, which is 2019 through 2021, and the triennial review is nothing but an ongoing 3-year period where water quality is reassessed by the state according to the Clean Water Act. That's all that it is. And during that triennial review period 3 years ago, we actually got 13 miles of the South River designated for recreation for the first time ever.
Yeah.
So now we are working on those other 27 miles during this triennial review, and I do expect it will work because if Georgia EPD tells me no, they're going to have to tell me why.
Yeah, I think you got this covered. All right, Chris. Chris and I met. We were filming a Good Road episode, and we met for the first time, and I really didn't know what to expect. Agro diversity. I'm like, okay, I kind of get it, but And then I talked to Chris and understood the passion about what he's doing, and I want you to tell these folks, agro diversity. Like, what is that about, and what drives you to push with that?
Yeah, big question. Agro-diversity, agro-biodiversity, or just diversity in food and farming, the Utopian Sea Project thinks of that as, or maybe let's approach it from the other angle. When we look at our food system today, we don't see any diversity. You walk into the supermarket and all the crops that you see are probably the same crops you see in every other supermarket, and the severe limited amount of crops and varieties within those crops. If you see okra at all, it'll just be like one single green pod of okra. And it's just like this really, I feel as consumers, we're totally duped into buying into this industrial food system that offers us so little when there's so much potential for that food system to be amazingly delicious, diverse, and when we have diversity in the food system, also climate resilience. And so I think the biggest example I always have to bring things back to okra. We have that one green pod that everybody knows if they like okra at all. If you go to the USDA gene banks where they store a whole bunch of seeds, there's over 1,000 different varieties of okra out there. 1,000 different varieties, and we've started trying to grow them all. We've grown hundreds of varieties of okra now, and they're so different and diverse, and you get all these different pod shapes and pod colors, and there's flavor differences, and the plant structure, and that's just what we can see of the plants, like the nutritional components, the root structures, like everything that is important to creating a diverse system already exists. We just don't get to know about it or access it or experience it, and I think that's terrible, and that's what we're working against.
And so how are you helping folks access that?
So we kind of set ourselves up as we think of ourselves as a multi-stakeholder approach to shifting the food and farming system. So we acknowledge that people first need to be aware of these things. So we do a lot of kind of just educational outreach in terms of just simply growing them, and even just a photograph of 60 different varieties of okra, or one of my board members has over 100 varieties of sweet potatoes. We've started working with collards, and there's like 90 different varieties of collards. And so just growing them and photographing them and sharing them is kind of like a light bulb moment for a lot of people, where they're like, the common reaction is, I just didn't know. And if you don't know, you know.
Yeah, that was what we heard from the end
Yeah,
as well.
precisely.
Right,
It's the same. Yeah. You got to know to be able to miss it, and then want it and demand it. So that's part of it. But then, so we work with farmers to like show them that diversity and encourage them to grow it. We work with consumers to try and create demand for that. So we do chef events, we do tastings, we do a whole lot of public kind of just straight up outreach online. I do a lot of speaking events. Like, we're just, anybody that will listen, we're just kind of like doing this broad thing.
All right,
Yeah.
but you also, we talked a little bit about the fact that with climate warming, climate change warming, we know it's happening, right?
Uh-huh.
And so some of the plants that are native to, let's say, Asheville, right? Some of those crops may not be able to grow that well here in 15, 20 years. You're experimenting with some more temperate crops that might do well here if we continue to heat up like we seem to be.
Yeah, that's kind of, so diversity is good because it's fun and more interesting and all that sort of stuff, but it's also really important because diversity is a pillar of resilience, and we're moving in a direction where our climate is not stable, not even close to stable, and growing food is becoming harder and harder. I run this nonprofit, but a lot of the time I'm just a farmer, and it's really, really hard out there. And we're just trying to grow food, and that's what most farmers want to do. They just want to grow food. But it really is challenging in this erratic weather conditions that we're facing. And so how do we make a food system that is able to be resilient in the face of erratic weather? And one of the ways we can do that is by having huge amounts of diversity in that system. Diversity gives us resilience. And so we think about that in lots of different prongs. That could be this massive varietal diversity where instead of just one okra grown on every farm, that's effectively a monoculture, even if it's spread amongst different farms, but it's effectively a monoculture. So we can do varietal diversity, but the other thing that you're talking about is, while we want to mitigate climate change as rapidly as possible, we're also going to have to just wake up and face the fact that it's happening, and we're going to have to adapt to climate change. So how do we adapt our farm systems? And so we're starting to look at other crops that currently are on the margins of being able to grow in here, but they have like culinary and cultural history in the tropics. And so we're bringing those crops to Western North Carolina and trying to work out if and how we can grow them to be successful. We're trying to introduce them into the market, knowing that as we go forward, they'll get easier to grow, but farmers aren't going to grow them without a market. So it's kind of like, it's this really weird balancing act of like getting farmers to grow something that there's not a market for, getting chefs interested in something that farmers aren't yet growing, but knowing we're going to need those crops in a few years because it's going to get real hard to grow potatoes, and maybe we should all be eating taro. So
Right, I was going to ask you for a good example. Taro is a good example, right?
Taro is kind of becoming our flagship crop. It's I speak to a lot of people that just aren't even aware of taro as a food crop, but it's one of our, like, worldwide, it's the most ancient domesticated crop. It's been around for over 5,000 years. It's a starchy tuber. It can pretty much do everything that potatoes can do, and the leaves are also edible. It's just a fantastic crop. When we grow it in Western North Carolina, it yields as well as the potato. It doesn't get any of the pests and disease issues, so it's a more sustainable crop to grow. We grow it without irrigation, we grow it without pesticides, fertilizers, any of the sides. And yeah, it's like, why the hell isn't everyone already growing taro? And it's because no one's thought about growing taro here. So we're trying to just bring that to the food system because there's no reason not to. And in the future, there'll be a really good reason to do so.
Well, I mean, you reminded me, I was asking you about, well, are we okay bringing in these, non-native species? And you reminded me, sweet potatoes. They're not, to me, they felt native, but they're not.
For sure, yeah. I'm pro-native plants for sure, but if we're being realistic, then look at what you eat every single day, and very, very small amount of it is native. Like okra is not native, even though it's a southern food. It's from West Africa. Sweet potatoes are not native. They're from southern South America, even though they're North Carolina's state vegetable. So, let's be realistic about native foods and what we're actually eating, while also trying to preserve habitat in a more progressive native way. Both can be true.
Yeah, right. That's what, you opened my eyes to. So we're winding down, but I want to ask a couple of just big picture questions. Like Jenny, what's your biggest challenge? A lot about what this Champions of Conservation is about is showing the work you guys are doing, and if you want people to take something away, what is the biggest challenge you face?
Well, you should never ask an executive director what that person's biggest challenge, because they're always going to say money. You do recognize that, right? But really, it is about, I think it's what everyone said across this dais, or people don't know what they don't know. And until we are providing the education, that's the biggest thing to prevent the issue from happening. And so it's just making sure the message is gotten or received in all places. Because I could literally be put out of a job if people knew to have a will, and if their loved ones knew to probate the will. But that's not going to happen. But that's the greatest challenge.
Right. So, Mike, what do you want people to know? I mean, you're at ground zero of combating the loss of turkey population. Is there a takeaway?
That's a really good question. I would say what I would like people to know, and it's not just turkeys, it's our environment in general. It's all the species that we cherish. One of the greatest challenges I face is getting people to recognize that the future of conservation rests on private landowners. It doesn't rest on public agencies. Right. It doesn't rest with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, with Georgia DNR or North Carolina Wildlife Resources Commission. They're not going to control the future of our natural resources. It's going to be us. If you have private land, or you can influence somebody that has private land, you're going to be the future of conservation of natural resources. That's the reality of where we are. And I think a lot of people place blame to agencies when in reality it's us. It's going to hinge on us, particularly as private landowners.
Yeah. I've let my yard go wild.
So you're that neighbor, right?
Yeah. I grow the best clover you've ever seen.
You're that guy that the neighbors walk by and go, "What the hell is this guy doing with his yard?"
I can't. I'm over grass.
Yeah.
I've got a milkweed corner. I've got, I'm about monarchs. Yeah, diversity, right? I'm just, I want my kids to see what, that little slice of land could be and what it could do. And that's kind of what you're saying, right? Granted, I'm not making a big change in the little backyard, but if everybody's backyard changed.
Exactly. So if you look at the realities of private land ownership, most people only own small tracts.
Right.
So, this mindset that, well, I only own 5 acres or 2 acres or 3 acres or whatever, I can't make a difference. That's nonsense. If we all put our heads together and work collectively, you can make a difference, even on small tracts. Because if anybody in here owns land, I don't own land. I don't have the resources to own land. But what I do is I work with private landowners who are wealthy, and they have large private tracts of land, and they have the resources to put into it. And when you start making improvements to your property, it becomes infectious. The people around you see what you're doing. They want to be a part of it. There's some gamesmanship involved, as you know. But I've seen the same things with cooperative landowners where you might have 10 landowners. Nobody owns more than 20 acres. But you put that neighborhood together, if you will, and now you have 200 acres, and then you have 300 acres, and the next thing you know, you have something that's relevant. There's a footprint there that's relevant, and that's going to be the future of conservation in this country. That's just the realities of it.
Right. Yep, absolutely. So, Jacqueline, is there a time on the river that you love most?
Anytime?
Anytime. There you go.
Yeah, I mean, it's as I said, just a wonderful small urban river. Probably the biggest challenge that it faces these days is where it is, and its history. But we're making a lot of progress towards organizing the community, getting them involved, showing them what they missed and what they have in front of them. So we're making we've made a lot of progress over the last 13 years, and a lot of the very important improvements have been made, both at the state and the local level. So, we will continue. I think, as we would say, turn the corner and headed in the right direction.
Yeah, absolutely. Mitzi, kudzu. Is there any way to stop it?
Kudzu is definitely a big challenge to deal with. You drive anywhere in the Southeast, and you're going to see a big wall of kudzu. Is there ways to control it? Sure. There's definitely ways, but you have to be as aggressive as the plant is growing. Other issues when it comes to kudzu is oftentimes it's not a problem until it's a problem. So as long as it's creeping up some pine trees on the side of a road and it's not impacting anyone, it's not a big problem for anyone. But once that kudzu starts crossing over and crossing onto houses, buildings, whatnot, and then causing impacts, maybe even destroying some of the trees that it's holding on to, those situations, that's when it's a problem. And at that point, that's when people want to control that problem. It's not, oh, look, here's some kudzu here, let's devise a plan and get rid of it. It's, oh yeah, there's kudzu. Let's keep on driving, and as long as it's not impacting anyone, then we'll leave it be. And that is the biggest thing right now is lack of actual attention to kudzu.
Right. So one more question for you. How have your cultural values as a member of the Choctaw, how has that shaped you as a conservationist?
I think it's just that tie to land. I mean, yeah. As a Choctaw tribal member, we're grown to basically live off the land. Traditionally, we were hunter-gatherers. We hunted for our food. We gathered for our food. Everything was about the food. And then so being raised in an atmosphere where not only was it utilized for food, it was utilized for cultural arts. It was utilized for ceremony. Those definitely put some kind of extra drive, if you will, into wanting to be out there and wanting to conserve and wanting to protect and enhance not just tribal lands, but lands in general.
Yep, that's great. JJ, what's next? eDNA, like any really wild, mind-blowing tools that are coming?
I mean, just the field of genetics is continuing to boom and change our lives in ways that we see every day, but we don't always realize. I mean, the COVID vaccine is a great example of what we can do, and the fact that we can sequence all these different variants and know what they are and how to treat them is just like something from medicine that translates over. And so the fact that we're now able to sequence billions of base pairs of DNA and whole genomes of animals. It just gives us so many more tools to understand how to conserve species and how to tell that story that they're telling us with their genes to be able to conserve them. As far as the eDNA side, continuing to do amazing things. Air eDNA is now becoming a thing where we can set up, and everything from setting it up at the end of a field to pick up dust that's collected over a month or so and tell what's in the area to just really neat. And to go back to the medical world, I know we're not talking medical, but it's a neat example of they're starting to use filters in operating rooms to suck air while they're doing surgeries, and then afterwards you can sequence and if there's anything like resistant strains of bacteria, you can treat in different ways post surgery. So we again, like with COVID and things like that, we're using these technologies that were created in conservation to better our lives. They look at wastewater treatment water to test for COVID levels and things like that. So there's a lot on the horizon, and it just continues to be really, really cool area to work in.
Sounds it. Almost as exciting as magazines. All right, Julie, I think the question on everybody's mind, you're not going to retire anytime soon, are you? Good. We need you out there. Don't you drive like a fancy sports car?
A very old fancy sports car, yes.
Okay. All right, we'll let you.
So they know I'm coming.
All right, Chris, we're going to wrap it up with you. What's the coolest thing growing on the farm right now?
Oh my gosh. That's a terrible question. This is with biodiversity. Everything is cool.
All right. What's the most surprising thing? What surprised you the most? I follow your Instagram. I've seen the giant.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I still
Terrible question.
I did. One of the things that I'm most excited about growing right now are these like really diverse populations where we've taken a whole bunch of different varieties and let them all cross with each other, and then we save seeds from them, and then we grow them. And so we have these not just diversity in crops or diversity in varieties, but we have like intra-variety diversity where I can plant a packet of collard seeds out and every single collard plant is totally genetically different. And in terms of like climate resilience and adaptability and the adaptive capacity of that population, it's absolutely huge. And then there's crazy things coming out where like we know that trees talk to each other, and like a mother tree can give warning signals and even share nutrients to sicker trees. And so if we have these like really diverse populations that have a wide breadth of genetic intelligence, then there's a chance that they could actually, in an annual crop, like plants that have the genetic intelligence to be disease resistant could share that with the rest of the population. And we have these just like really robust populations that could really give us true food security in a climate unstable future. And that's what we need.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Yeah. All right, everyone. We are gonna wrap up. This has been tremendous for me. I can't thank you guys enough. The issue's just hitting. I'm sure you're gonna feel the G&G effect, and I hope it does wonderful things for all of you. The takeaway here is, we've got to open our eyes, and we can all make a difference. It's true, right? Even if it feels small, you can make a difference. And you guys are inspiring us to do that, so thank you.
What an amazing conversation, Dave. Thank you for being a steward of this. Thank you to each of you for your heart and commitment. What amazing stories and facts. Thank you for that. A little point of privilege as Explore Asheville and the home of this amazing opportunity here as champions of conservation. We would be remiss if we did not recognize the patriarch here. John Ager, if you would please. Thank you. One of our board members, Larry Crosby. Larry, thank you for being here, and Emily, another one of our team members. And Jim Stokely. Jim, where, if he's still here, perhaps. So just for point of privilege, Jim Stokely is the son of Wilma Dykeman. Who knows who Wilma Dykeman is here? Okay. That was one of my first entrees into conservation here in Asheville and Buncombe County, and what a legacy she leaves. What a badass. I just have to say. So thank you all for spending your evening with us. Thank you, Garden and Gun, for helping curate these kinds of meaningful conversations and humans. And I will turn it back to you, Dave.
All right. I think that is it. We appreciate you guys, Vic, and we appreciate all of you. We appreciate you for reading the magazine. There's no magazine, there are no events without you. So thank you very much, and have a good evening.